following scene introduces John Brickner, a man recently released from prison after serving 4 years less than the 7-year sentence he initially received for a past murder. Determined to turn his life around, John sets out to make amends and start fresh. He relocates to Seattle and takes up work as a construction laborer in hopes of building a stable future. One evening, on his way to a bar, John witnesses a waitress named Frankie being harassed by 3 men. John felt compelled to teach the 3 men a lesson. He stepped in, swiftly grabbed one of them by the arm, and made the instigator apologize to Frankie. Intimidated by John's strength and unwavering resolve, the trio quickly retreated and left the bar. Impressed by what he had just seen, the bar owner offered John a job as a security guard on the spot. John accepted, and from that night on, he began living a double life, working as a construction worker by day and a bar security guard by night. The following day, John began his new role as a security guard at the bar. When a scuffle broke out between 2 drunken patrons, he initially attempted to defuse the situation peacefully. But when they continued to cause trouble, John was forced to step in and physically restrain them, ultimately removing them from the premises. Watching the entire scene unfold was Reno Paul Saint, Frankie's boyfriend. Impressed by John's composure and skill, Reno approached him afterward, handed over his business card, and suggested a different kind of job, encouraging John to reach out if he was interested. John politely turned down Reno's offer, explaining that he was already juggling 2 jobs. But one day, after finishing his shift at the construction site, he was unexpectedly approached by a woman named Veronica. To his surprise, she was the widow of the man he had killed years ago, the same woman who had submitted the petition that led to his early release. However, her help had come with a price. Veronica now demanded that John raise $250,000 to pay for a heart transplant that could save her daughter's life. Determined to make amends, John resolved to help Veronica raise the money for her daughter's surgery. After returning home, he counted every dollar he had, but it wasn't even close to the amount she needed. Feeling desperate and out of options, John turned to Frankie for help. She agreed and brought him to meet Reno at a discreet location. When they arrived, Reno guided John into a packed building pulsing with energy. Inside, a raucous crowd roared with excitement as fighters battled it out in the center of a makeshift arena. After John brought up the job offer, Reno revealed his true intention. He wanted John to fight for him. Each win would bring in substantial prize money from betting. But despite the financial temptation and Reno's pressure, John, still on parole, firmly refused to take part in illegal fights. He stood his ground and wouldn't budge. The next day, feeling the weight of his decision, John visited Veronica's house to apologize for not being able to raise the money she desperately needed. Hearing John's apology, Veronica reminded him of the promise he had made while in prison that he would do anything to make up for what he'd done. Her voice rose in anger, and the commotion drew the attention of her daughter, Sarah. The frail, sickly girl slowly emerged from her room, curious about the noise. The sight of Sarah, so weak and vulnerable, struck John deeply. A wave of sorrow and guilt washed over him. Overwhelmed by emotion, he finally vowed to Veronica that he would do whatever it took to raise the money for Sarah's life-saving treatment. The next morning, while working at the construction site, John was unexpectedly fired by his boss over a minor mistake. But just moments later, that same boss suddenly collapsed from a heart attack right in front of him. Acting fast, John administered first aid, managing to keep him alive until help arrived. That night, still burdened by Veronica's plea, John returned to the underground arena to get a better sense of what he might be stepping into. There, he spotted Reno and Frankie watching a brutal, high-stakes match. The fight took a turn for the worse when Reno's fighter was severely injured and had to be rushed to a nearby room for emergency treatment. After the examination, the doctor confirmed that the injured fighter was in no condition to continue into the second round. Seizing the moment, John stepped forward and volunteered to take his place. But before the match could begin, the arena was disrupted by the sudden arrival of Mr. Wolf, a menacing figure there to collect a debt from Reno. Reno tried to defuse the situation, assuring Mr. Wolf that he'd pay the full amount once the fight concluded. When the match finally kicked off, John and his opponent launched into a brutal exchange of punches and kicks. The crowd roared with excitement, their cheers fueling the intensity of the bout and electrifying the atmosphere through the end of the first round. In the next round, weapons were introduced into the fight. John's opponent quickly seized a steel rod and swung it at him. Though he was struck, John's resilience held strong, and he fought back with fierce determination. In the end, he overpowered his opponent with nothing but his bare hands, claiming a hard-earned victory. Later, in the locker room, Reno handed John his prize money. However, John chose to share part of the winnings with the fighter he had replaced. A few days later, after finishing his morning run, John was surprised to see Reno and Frankie waiting to meet him. Reno suggested that John continue fighting, pointing out the potential for even greater earnings in the future. After some thought, John agreed. Reno also invited John to stay with him for the sake of convenience, making it easier to train and prepare for the upcoming fights. For their next match, Reno and John met with Deacon, the referee, at a restaurant to discuss the details and requirements. During their conversation, Reno openly admitted that he had gone bankrupt and could no longer afford to place a large bet on the fight. Another obstacle was that John's parole status was still unresolved. However, after a tense negotiation, John managed to persuade Deacon to allow him to fight. Not long after, Reno was seen pawning a valuable ring that had been passed down to him by his father, a legendary former fighter. The ring became collateral for the upcoming match. Later, Reno took John to meet a man named Nestor. But upon their arrival, Nestor immediately ordered his men to kill Reno for failing to repay his debt on time. Seeing the situation unfold, John acted quickly, stepping in to stop Nestor's men from carrying out their orders. Without hesitation, he boldly declared that he was willing to fight them, but with one condition: if he won, Nestor had to release Reno. If he lost, he would take full responsibility for paying off Reno's debt. The tense 10-minute battle began with a $10,000 wager on the line. John wasted no time, overpowering Nestor's men with a series of powerful punches and kicks, leaving his opponents unable to continue the fight. In no time, John's opponent was knocked unconscious, securing John's victory. Without wasting a moment, he and Reno left the area. On their way home, John received a call from Veronica, who told him that her daughter had suddenly collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Upon arriving, John felt a surge of anxiety as he saw Sarah lying weak and unconscious in the hospital bed. Determined to help, he vowed to do everything in his power to ensure she could undergo surgery as soon as possible. After leaving the hospital, John accidentally overheard a conversation between Reno and Frankie in the living room. Frankie confronted Reno, accusing him of exploiting John to settle his debts. However, Reno vehemently denied the accusation. He argued that John was a former convict and not the person Frankie believed him to be. Reno even suggested that Frankie might have feelings for John. Just then, John appeared, walking straight into the room, overhearing the conversation. Later that night, as John prepared for another fight, Reno apologized for his earlier words. Despite winning match after match, John's earnings still fell short of the amount needed to qualify for a fight against the current champion. John's reputation continued to grow, gradually diminishing the courage of other fighters. Many scheduled matches were canceled as opponents feared facing him and the possibility of defeat. Reno, however, understood the situation and reassured John that he would find another fighter to face him. One evening, while John was at the bar enjoying a drink, he noticed two people watching him from a car. They turned out to be bodyguards for Veltz, a mob boss who had lent money to Reno. While Reno was off gambling elsewhere, Veltz's men approached him, and Reno, desperate, begged for more time to repay the debt. Veltz's men gave Reno a week to settle his debt, warning that if he failed, they would harm Frankie. One night, John faced off against a fierce Mexican fighter in a brutal match. Despite the tough battle, John delivered an outstanding performance, defeating his opponent and claiming victory. Afterward, John, Reno, and Frankie went to a bar to celebrate. While they were there, John asked Reno why he hadn't been more strategic in arranging his fights. Reno explained that as Jones' name gained fame, the betting stakes rose, pushing them to keep fighting just to cover their growing expenses. Shortly after, John received a call from Veronica, and they rushed to her house. There, he found her unconscious, alongside a letter revealing that Sarah's organ donation had been canceled. The letter suggested that Veronica had let Sarah down so deeply it drove her to take her own life. Wasting no time, John hurried Veronica to the hospital. While waiting there, he opened up to Frankie about his reasons for entering the fights. All Joan wanted was to save a child, the very child whose father he had accidentally killed. As soon as he heard that Veronica had regained consciousness, he rushed to see her. There, he explained that he had been fighting to earn money for her daughter's surgery. Meanwhile, Reno headed to the pawn shop, hoping to reclaim his father's ring. But he arrived too late. The ring had already been sold to someone else for a much higher price. Frustrated and angry, Reno realized there was nothing he could do to get it back. One night, Joan once again faced off against Nestor's men in the ring. After the match, Reno and Nestor arranged a high-stakes fight, each putting up $150,000. Joan pleaded with Nestor to have his men forfeit, but Nestor refused, insisting the fight go on. Worried he might accidentally kill someone, Joan made the difficult decision to walk away, handing the victory to Nestor. Meanwhile, Veltz's men caught up with Reno and viciously beat him for failing to repay his debt on time. The next day, John was once again tailed by Veltz's men. They demanded he come with them and brought him to an opulent mansion. There, Joan came face to face with Veltz himself, who, to his surprise, turned out to be the father-in-law of Joan's boss at the construction site. Grateful to Joan for saving his son-in-law during a heart attack, Veltz told him he would grant any request. Joan made two. The first was that $150,000 be used to fund Sarah's heart surgery. Joan's second request was for Veltz to settle all of Reno's debts. However, Veltz agreed to grant only one of the two favors, leaving the choice to Joan. After a moment of thought, John chose to have Reno's debts paid off. Following the meeting, John decided it was time to say goodbye to Reno and Frankie, as he planned to move out of Reno's house. Grateful, Reno thanked John for lifting the heavy burden of his financial troubles. Not long after, Reno received a call informing him that someone had placed a bet for John to face the reigning champion, Sharp. That evening, Joan arrived at the arena to take on the formidable opponent. As the match began, he raised his hand, and the sound of applause and music filled the air. At the same time, Veronica was hurrying through the hospital hallway when she was told that Sarah's surgery fees had been fully covered. Joan later showed up at the hospital to offer her support, and Veronica, overwhelmed with gratitude, thanked him for everything he had done. Shortly after, Reno and Frankie arrived, and Joan returned the rings he had reclaimed from the pawn shop. Reno expressed his heartfelt thanks for John's unwavering support throughout their journey.